friends, and welcome to the first episode of Unscripted Opinion. Here I will be covering a wide variety of topics, from electrical engineering and graphical design all the way to electronic music and programming. The first item on my list is this set of MIDI synthesizers that you may have seen in my previous video. If you haven't, then go check it out. The devices in question are Korg NS5R, Yamaha MU100, and Roland SC-55 MK. I'm going to be excluding MT32 from this demonstration for the reason that it was created before the general MIDI standard was established with which all three of these devices comply, so it exists entirely in its own category. Well, let's dive right in. Let's start by looking at the build quality. You have to realize that at the time of me making this video, it's been almost 20 years since these devices were made, so as time progresses, their physical preservation will be just as important as the internal function. The top device in the stack is Korg NS5R, and it stands out like a sore thumb right away for the reason that it's completely white. Even for Korg, it is quite a design departure, as their earlier models used to be black, and even the higher-end NX5R in the same series is once again black. To me, this looks more like an engineering device, and I brought out my function generator, which you can see right here, which is not a musical instrument, but it looks like it could have been made by the same company. The thing that grabs my attention with Korg right away is this big control knob, which is weirdly positioned. It is located on this slightly elevated piece of plastic with a cutout, yet the knob itself extends well beyond it and almost lines up with the volume control knob. Why position it this way? I have no idea. Yeah, just look at this. Look at this knob. Like how big it is. It's just comical. Does it have to be this big? I don't think so. Because let's look at my Roland sequencer. Look at this. It is also a similar looking control knob. It's built the exact same way. But you see how much clearance you need to operate it. It has an indentation on it. That's all you need. This thing doesn't even have to stick out. If it has this hole, that's all you need. Korg, what the hell, man? And what were you thinking? Going down, we have Yamaha, which looks pretty standard. MU50 through MU100 look more or less the same, with a varying number of control buttons on the front. Lower end models will have fewer buttons. This one has most of them. Roland, everything is straightforward and simple. Once again, very nice and clean design. I do not have any negative things to say about it. Space is well utilized, and all the buttons, everything is clearly labeled. This might come as a surprise to you, but in terms of design aesthetics, Korg is my least favorite of all three, and it has nothing to do with its white color or this rarely protruding control knob. My biggest problem is with these buttons, and the reason is that they're rubbery, they're soft, and to make it even worse, they decided to print labels on top of them, which will eventually rub off, and then at that point, you will have no way of restoring them, unless you have another Korg to borrow parts from. Comparing that to Roland, for instance, all buttons are made of plastic, solid plastic. They do have some labels on them, but they're just left and right arrows, so if those are rubbed off, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, because the function labels are printed above them. They're printed on the front panel, not on the buttons themselves. Yamaha is clear winner here, because buttons, they're all just as solid as ones on Roland, but the labels are all printed on the front panel. So in my opinion, this device would last the longest, if not one little problem, which I will come back to later. In terms of control buttons and how easy they are to operate, Yamaha and Roland get the prize. Korg is once again last in this race for the reason that they chose to sacrifice this essential space for a huge single function control knob, while they could have instead put 9 extra buttons and have them all perform a single function instead of doubling them up the way that they did. Trying to pick a winner between Roland and Yamaha is quite tough. I think Roland is my favorite for the reason that it is very straightforward. You can just plug it in and figure out what every key does without having to go through manual. Yamaha, on the other hand, has menus, and controls go quite deep. So once you start tweaking all the different presets and functions, you will find that even this number of buttons may sometimes feel insufficient. Before I forget, it's worth mentioning how each device is powered. Both Yamaha and Roland come with their own external power bricks. Korg, on the other hand, has a built-in power supply. I'm using mine with a step-down transformer, but technically it is not essential. So Korg is a lot more portable. How does each one of those devices turn on? Well, with Korg you do it by clicking the volume button. With Yamaha, same thing. You click the volume knob and it turns off or on. The only thing about Yamaha is that it has two volume control knobs. Top one is reserved for this auxiliary input, which can be used either for a microphone or for an electric guitar. The volume control knob is the one that does the powering, and I always find it confusing which one is which. Roland has a dedicated power button. Click it and it turns off. Typically when you plug it in first, the default state is on, so it will look like that as soon as you plug in the power supply. And then you turn it on and off by hitting the button, just like that. With mechanical switches such as these ones, when you turn the power off, the flow of electricity is eliminated entirely through the system. Roland, on the other hand, has a push button which links to a control circuit on the inside. So even when the device is off, it's not actually off. Some electricity keeps flowing through the system, and my guess is that it's done to keep the battery that is located on the inside charged, which preserves all the settings and preferences. Next item on the list is how easy and intuitive it is to operate each one of these devices. Of all three, I think Roland is the most intuitive. It has the simplest menu structure. You do not have to dive deep into the menus to access all of its functions. It has some secret key combinations that you will only be able to find out by reading the manual, but for basic functionality, if you just want to listen to music or play retro games, you don't actually have to know anything. You can just plug it into a USB to MIDI adapter or into an old sound card, and it will just run out of the box. Everything will make sense. All the buttons are clearly labeled. I think this is one device that you can totally operate without reading any information about it. Yamaha is a more complex device with a deep menu system. It may be less intuitive, but you can still figure out without a manual. Some of those buttons will have multiple functions. For instance, right now I'm in play mode. But if I hit play button a couple of times, you will see that the visual layout will cycle. So it actually has multiple functions, which may not be apparent unless you actually mess with it. To help out, there's a nice bar at the bottom of the interface that provides a lot of additional information. For instance, right now I'm on channel 1, which is set to piano, and I can see a little representation of the piano, something that's absent from Roland or Korg. So that is something that I do like. It'll offer you the most information compared to the other two. Korg chose not to number every single channel because they probably couldn't fit all the digits, or they were just getting too small. So they chose to do it this way, where they have 1.5, 10, and so on. I think that it is the worst design decision, and they even went as far as to correct it on the NX5R model. So I guess many people complained that it was just unworkable. Yamaha displays the first 16 channels by default. They're all clearly labeled. I can tell which instrument is being played, and if I hit the play button, then I can expand to include 32 channels. So it is very useful, very visual. I have nothing bad to say about it. Roland can only display the first 16 channels because the window allocated to the graphics equalizer is small and non-resizable. Yamaha and Roland had a clear strategy in mind, and it shows. While with Korg, sometimes it feels like they didn't know what they were doing. That being said, Korg has one unique function that the other two devices lack, and I wish they did have it. It has a tone button, which allows you to preview the sound of the instrument. Let's just pretend like you don't have a keyboard plugged in. Maybe you just want to make sure the device is running, that the volume is set correctly, or find out what a specific instrument sounds like. You hit the tone key, and it does the same thing that if you were to hit keys on the keyboard. With Yamaha and Roland, your only option is to have an external keyboard. Without them, you have no way of previewing the sound of instruments, as far as I know. I mean, feel free to correct me if I get any of this information wrong. I'm not an expert, and I'm only telling you what I know so far. Yamaha will give you a little icon that'll give a hint on what the instrument category is. If you're trying to hunt down the drum section, then it'll show you a picture of drums and things like that. So this thing is just absolutely beautiful. I love this little icon. Roland, well, with this one, you'll just have to go by the names of instruments, and you will definitely need a keyboard to do anything useful with it, or computer interface. So when it comes to intuitiveness, Roland gets my vote. Yamaha wins the sophistication prize. Korg gets no prize at all, but it gets an honorable mention because of this tone button. Before moving on, let's look at the demo songs. We're not going to listen through them, that would be a waste of time. But let's say you just bought a box, you just unpacked it, and you want to make sure that it's working. You don't have it hooked up to anything yet. Each one of them will offer some demo functionality. How do you do it? How easy it is to do? Let's go with devices one by one. With Roland, you have to read the manual. Unless you read the manual, you will not know how to enable the demo songs, as it has no complex menus. The way that you access demo songs is by holding part buttons together, part left and part right, and then you power it on, and it will give you some songs that it has in its internal memory. I think there are 4 of them. And if you hit the all button, then the system will begin playing. And you can use the mute button to stop the playback. You can then use part buttons to go to a different song. It's that easy. And then to get back to normal function, you power it down and power it on again. With Yamaha, to get to the demo mode, you have to go to one of the menus. I think it is in the utility mode. Yes. I hit utility button, and then one of the 4 functions is called demo. Then I go and hit the enter key and hit enter again as the menu prompts me to, and the device will begin playing music. Again, very intuitive and very presentable. And it starts doing little things with the LEDs, which I think is quite neat. Very marketable device. And to stop it, I believe you just hit the exit. Yeah, that brings you back to the root menu. Korg is easy. It has a dedicated demo button right here. Talk about a waste of space. I mean, they don't have enough buttons as it is, and they choose to waste an entire function on something that's probably only going to be accessed once when you first get the device, and that's it. But anyway, let's just show you how it operates. Hit the demo key, and you probably can't see the display, but it gives you the option of playing 1 or 2 songs. Let's finish by looking at the ports that they chose to include on the front. Korg, very basic. Headphone jack, and that's it. Volume will control the volume of the headphones as well as the output on the back. Yamaha also has a 3.5mm headphones jack. The volume control knob will control the volume of the headphones and the output on the back. And this knob will control the input level of either microphone or an electric guitar. Roland has a headphones jack positioned below the volume control knob in a slightly different spot, and it has a MIDI input, which I like, and I'll mention it later again. With the Yamaha, it's a little bit weird that they chose to use different sockets for headphones and the inputs. Well, I guess most professional microphones are 1/4 inch, and most modern headphones, non-studio grade, are 3.5mm. I guess that speaks of the level of the device, that it's not really designed for professional producers. Otherwise, headphone jack would have been 1/4 inch as well. Well, I guess enough talking about what these devices look like from the front. Let's flip these babies and look at the back. Good idea to turn them off first. You see, I just pressed the volume control knob. Forgot that Roland is different. Have to make sure that I don't confuse which power supply is connected to which device when I'm finished. Korg, I think looks alright. We have the power connector, standard Sony type power connector. Very easy to get a plug in case you don't have one. PC host port, which is used to connect to a serial port on a PC or Mac. I think nobody uses those anymore, but those used to be common. They're always very difficult to get working, especially on our Windows. And for inputs and outputs, we have one MIDI in, one MIDI out, one MIDI through. very logical. For the outputs, they use 1/4-inch jacks. For inputs, they use composite inputs. Why not the same? And look down. Look at Yamaha. They have output, which is composite, and input, which is also composite. Not a problem. So they didn't have a problem with that. How come Korg did? Why mix different plug types? I mean, this creates such big hassle, unnecessary hassle. Completely unnecessary. Just stick with one plug. Either keep them both as 1/4-inch or keep them both as composite. That just, again, doesn't make any sense. There's this one extra feature, which is a volume control knob for the expansion card. And in my previous video, I showed you Serdaco wavetable that I used with this Korg, and this knob is what controls its volume level. The problem is that it's located on the back, so if your system is positioned in a tight spot, maybe it's squeezed in a rack between other units, and then you have to adjust the volume of that card, it may be difficult to access. You may have to pull the box in and out just to change the settings, and again, poor design choice. I think they should have positioned it closer to the front or done something differently about it. Maybe had a combined volume level for the master output in this. I just don't know. Again, my least favorite design is one from Korg, and it has additional ventilation holes because this is how the air would typically flow through it. For the power transformer, it would go in from the back and then exit from the top. And I know some people, some musicians, they like putting things on top of their musical synthesizers. I see, if you look on eBay, you will sometimes see like coffee cup stains, like different things, traces of different things that used to rest on top of MIDI boxes. This system has an internal power transformer, so you cannot block ventilation. You have to make sure that these holes remain open as well as ones on top. So this device has to be well ventilated. That being said, I want to add that it isn't the hottest box of all three. Yamaha actually heats up the most, and I think it's probably because of the front panel display and the backlight, because backlights typically operate at higher voltages. The backlight may run at, let's say, 75 volts, for instance. So there'll be a little circuit inside boosting the input voltage all the way up to that necessary voltage level. So my guess is that since it has the brightest backlit display, then it probably is the reason why the box gets so hot. But anyway, let's move on. In terms of inputs, it has 2 inputs instead of 1. Look at Korg. 1 input, Yamaha, 2 inputs. Beautiful. Do you need 2 inputs? Why is that necessary? Is it necessary? Well, depends on what you're doing. There are different circumstances under which you might need different ports. You maybe have multiple keyboards and you want them to feed the same MIDI system. Maybe you have a computer connection and a MIDI keyboard. Then it would be nice to have your computer go into MIDI 1 and then you plug your keyboard into MIDI 2 and mix them that way. Out and through, that's pretty standard. You're going to find it on every single MIDI device. No point mentioning it. Serial port has different modes. There's this selector switch that will switch between standard MIDI, different PC standards, or Mac. It has to do with this port and the kind of communication protocol that it's using. Once again, hardly anybody uses this port these days, so I don't think this matters at all. But it's there. What else? Well, input and output ports. This is beautiful, just beautiful. It's standard. Yeah, standard. You can get those cables anywhere easily, and then it's very easy to hook up. And it's good that both of these actually, they have both inputs and outputs. It's very useful. So you can daisy chain those things. Like when I run MIDI, I just have them going. I have MIDI from the keyboard or the sequencer going to in on the first box, and then it goes through, and in on the other box, then through and in on the third box. That's how we operate. And with sound, you don't want to do this. If you want to combine all three and then mix sounds together, then you need a proper mixer. But if you're desperate, if you don't have any money to spend on that, then you can technically even daisy chain the audio channels. So you can have output of this synthesizer going to input on this one, and output of this one to input on that one, and have them all play at the same time, and then you'll have to balance them with the use of volume control knobs on the front. And it's it's messy, it's difficult, but it's doable. I mean, if you're gonna crunch and you need to produce something in one go, if you cannot record things on a multi-track recorder, then yeah, you can do that. You can play live of all three and not a problem whatsoever. And lastly, Roland. Again, very clean, very nice. They even have some empty space here, like you see. So they were so proficient in their use of real estate space on the back that they even had some empty space left over, even though they have all the same functions that Yamaha has. One input, one output, one through port. Once again, selector switch, just like on Yamaha, for one MIDI protocol, two RS-232 protocols, which are different PC serial port protocols, and the one that I believe is a Mac equivalent. Has a little plastic thing here that when you plug the power supply in, you can wrap the cord around so that if it gets yanked, it doesn't pull the port, doesn't damage it, and just doesn't get detached. Something that Roland likes to put on almost all of their devices. I never use it, but again, that just shows that they had so much empty space, they probably didn't even know what extras to put here. So, which one of them is the best? That's the question. You may think that just by looking at it that Yamaha might be my top choice, but it isn't. You may say, oh, it has two inputs, while Roland only has one. That's inconvenient. But you have to remember, Roland had one MIDI input on the front. So it actually does have two inputs. And the way that they're positioned, I find it very convenient. I mean, typically, when I'm not using all three of these boxes, when I just use one, I typically just leave Roland Sound Canvas because it's most useful in the type of work that I'm doing. So I will have it on my desk and I'll have it connected to the computer through MIDI to USB adapter, and it'll be connected through the back to both input and output ports. But then sometimes I'll just want to play music. I don't want to disassemble and reassemble things every time that I change my MIDI layout. So I will just drag my keyboard over to my work desk and I will plug it into the front port without moving the box or doing anything additional. So the decision to put the second MIDI input on the front, I think that makes this box the clear winner in terms of the input and output interfaces. When it comes to the power plugs, well, nothing to say here. These ones are pretty standard. On Roland, it is labeled, and it is worth mentioning that it is center tap minus type of plug. Typically, the standard is that the center tap is positive and the outer shell is negative. Roland's are in reverse. The center will be negative, the outer side will be positive, and if you plug an incorrect power supply, then you will most likely fry it, or you will blow some internal components. It'll be fixable, it'll be serviceable, but it's still, I'm not I'm not recommending it. I better do things right and use legitimate power supplies. Use branded Roland, Yamaha, and Korg power supplies whenever you can. Don't mess with those things. They're already old enough and fragile. You don't want to take any risks when dealing with them. When it comes to servicing these machines, Roland has enough resources online. They're probably the most popular boxes because of the retro gaming scene. So you will find most online resources dedicated to this specific box. Yamahas, they're more popular with musicians. Again, tons of resources, great support up to this day, lots of information. Korg, this one is difficult, even though they do provide documentation, and there are forums where people discuss issues associated with them. They're dead last when it comes to resource availability, so they're quite difficult to work with. What makes the box unique is the presence of the wavetable header on the inside, as I mentioned once again in my previous video. Go watch it if you haven't. But other than that, if you want something easy and simple, something that works with a computer, with a keyboard, and is just a neat device, I'd say my number one choice will always be Roland. Yamaha, I guess it's good for people that want to combine game functionality with the ability to just play things. and have fun. Lots of presets, great sound that is sometimes even superior to Roland. And with Roland, when it comes to filters, reverberation and chorus are the only two filters that you have that are built in, and they're very weak, the weakest effects of all three. You will just not be able to do much with them. Yamaha has many more filters, has better presets, and you can really mess with it with the setups. You can get it sounding. You can get some unique sounds out of it, and it has many more instruments. And this probably has the biggest instrument bank of all three boxes. It has standard MIDI, and it has Yamaha's XG, which is their version of Roland's general synthesis. They're just additional instruments. And by default, general MIDI was designed for 127 different instruments, and then eventually, when that became a bottleneck, the company started providing their own extensions. Yamaha came up with XG, which is an extra instrument bank on top of the general MIDI set. Roland came up with GS, which is general synthesis. Sounds almost like general MIDI. Sometimes gets confusing, which is, again, it's just an additional instrument bank on top of the bass set. And Korg, well, it doesn't have a name for it, but it has tons of instruments. It has so many instrument banks and presets that it's not even funny. It's complex, it's big, poorly documented, it's spread all over the place. But if you if you spend enough time playing with this box, you will fall in love with it, because it has something that none of these boxes have. It has internal analog filters. It has the best sound if you know how to work with it. And you play MIDI on these two boxes, you go between Roland and Yamaha, you switch between them. Half the time there'll be only subtle differences between how they sound. Korg will never sound even remotely close. Most of the time it'll sound incorrect, and it sounds incorrect to my ears. Now I'll demonstrate a little bit later. But you will right away, you turn on a song, and you'll be able to tell that something's off, something's wrong. This box will interpret MIDI signals, control change, and program commands in its own way. And it'll respond to things that these boxes will not respond to, and vice versa. It's an interesting device, but it will take you time to get used to it. And if playing old retro games is all you intend on doing, if you're not a professional musician or not a prosumer musician type guy, then yeah, this box is definitely not for you. Go with Yamaha or Roland. If you're playing DOS games, get Roland. If you want to do a little bit of Windows MIDI, if you want to combine gaming with music production, probably Yamaha. And it's interesting. I mean, of all three, if you take company history into consideration, Yamaha is the oldest corporation, and it existed since 1800s in Japan. It is very, very old. It wasn't always doing music. It eventually migrated into the music scene, but it does many different things. I mean, even right now, if you go to eBay and Google Yamaha, the chances are that half of your search results will have nothing to do with music. It'll be helmets, motorcycles, and all the other things that Yamaha used to produce and still produces to this day. Korg is from the 60s. Again, a Japanese corporation. They're a little bit more recent, and I guess they just haven't made up their mind of where they wanted to go at this point. That's why the device is so awkward to operate. And when it comes to Roland, it is the youngest of the three, but I guess they were just thinking things right. They were looking at the examples of all the previous attempts from the competition, and they just made all the right decisions. And it's a beautiful machine, and it's no wonder why MS-DOS games support Sound Canvas and other Roland devices. It is because they're beautiful machines. I mean, the industry has spoken. All right, let's look at the front one more time, and then we'll be done with it. Well, And the last question that has to be answered, well, I guess it has to be asked first, is are there any issues that I consider unavoidable and severe? We can safely cross Roland off that list because that box is just absolutely perfect. It is flawless as far as I'm concerned. What it's designed to do, it does well, and I have no complaints whatsoever. It's a great little box that's ideal for retro gaming, and it's fine for music composition. It's a little bit limited, but I think it does everything that it was designed to do. Yamaha, this particular unit has a small electrical problem. When I bought it, it was in perfect cosmetic condition, but it has a little bit of an electrical glitch on the inside, and I might dedicate another episode to troubleshooting it. It doesn't affect its performance, but it's just a little bit annoying. If I were to bet on the longevity of these boxes, I would say that Roland would probably outlast the other two by a huge margin, because I have very old retro Roland devices and none of them ever had any issues. I think they build the best machines that are designed to last for decades. Yamaha's, on the other hand, are a little bit different. I think there's a little bit of planned obsolescence going on, and they tend to fail quite frequently. And I'm not talking about this box specifically, just in general. Yamaha devices, they're serviceable, which is, I guess, illustrated by the abundance of service manuals that are being traded online. It is very difficult to find an actual service manual for Rolands and Korgs, but for Yamaha, they're all over the place, as well as replacement components. You go on eBay, you'll find replacement buttons, knobs, and everything, which is, once again, an indication that those things tend to fail every once in a while. If I were to make bets, I would say that Korg was the second most likely to fail after Yamaha. Even though mine is perfectly preserved, you can see that the LCD is already faded and it is very hard to read, and you have to really angle your view to be able to tell what's going on, unlike with Roland and the Yamaha, fine and sharp. The backlight is quite dim. There's one nice feature that you can do with Korg is you can change the background color, something that you cannot do with Yamaha or Roland. And you can make it green. It's actually green by default, and I changed it to orange. And there's another function where you can code it so that the background color will react to the kind of information that the device is receiving. So if you're just working with a standard general MIDI set, it'll be one color, but then if the instruments expand into those banks above 127, then the color will change, and just by looking at it, you'll be able to tell what kind of data it is receiving. So it's kind of a nice feature, but also a gimmick, which is not really practical. The Korg has one very, very serious problem with it, and it is the lack of processing power. I mean, all of these boxes, on the inside, they're just purpose-built computers. They have their processors. There's a section that's dedicated to generation of the instrument sounds. There are some FX processors that create effects such as reverberation and echo, chorus. And there's another circuit which may or may not be part of the same processor that draws the graphics on the display. And with Roland devices always have the best response. You click the button and it responds immediately, so there's no lag. Everything just runs. You never feel like it's sluggish. Like all the Roland devices, once again, I never have anything bad to say about them. Yamaha, well, some of the menus, they have splash screens. I think the machine is just giving itself a little bit of time. It pads all the functionality a little bit. You go into the menu, it'll give you something just to entertain you for a little while. But there's no lag otherwise. Other than that, you just have to wait. It takes you time to go through menus. Korg is the worst offender. The problem with the Korg is that the CPU is really struggling. I don't remember if I complained in my previous video how unresponsive this jog wheel was, or whatever you call it. I think that the reason behind it has nothing to do with the mechanics or electronics, but with the fact that the CPU simply cannot keep up with the rate of input. So if you're scrolling through the menus quickly, if you're changing the instruments, you'll see them scroll forward and back. You'll start doing weird things. So when operating this wheel, you have to do it very, very slowly. Just like no more than maybe like 3 clicks a second. You have to gauge your interaction. Otherwise, the device will not be able to keep up. But it gets even worse when you actually start playing music. That's when the lack of CPU and processing power really exposes itself. And let me load a small sound clip just to demonstrate what happens. So I just have a simple beat going in the background. I hope you can hear it well. And it's going, right now it's playing just through Korg, not through the other two boxes. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to enter and exit the menu. I'm just going to hit the two buttons like that, left and right, in the menu, into the menu and out the menu. And listen to what's going to happen to the sound. Can you hear that? I'm not changing anything. I'm not actually altering any of the presets. All I'm doing is just manipulating the menus, which causes the display to refresh. And you can hear how the beat is getting all weird and off tempo. And that is simply due to the fact that the machine cannot keep up with the demands of this LCD display. I think it's just consuming too much processing power. They have their own splash screens and things like that. Yeah, let me kill the noise. Yeah, so I think they just overdid it. They should have done what Roland did. I mean, if you don't have the processing power, simplify. Have a standard LCD display that doesn't do any fancy graphics. Just dedicate all of your processing cycles to producing the sound, because that's the most important part. Because if you are playing live, if you're performing and using this box, and if you're trying to do any kind of setting manipulation live, then you'll be screwed with that box, because you don't want to be touching anything while it's playing, unless you're just sending direct MIDI commands. And even then, there are lots of tiny glitches. I mean, you really have to learn this machine. You have to, I would say that it's the biggest struggle with the best payoff, because once you do get it running, once you know its limitations, it'll blow you away. It'll be absolutely magnificent. But straight out of the box, you may get disappointed if you're not familiar with those shortcomings. Well, in conclusion, even though I set up this review as a sort of a showdown between all three machines, I think they all have their purpose, and that is the reason why I have all three. I'm not a collector. I'm not trying to get all of the devices that ever existed. No, I get a machine, I work with it for a little while, I run to a limitation, then I find something else that does that thing that the other machines will not do. For instance, Roland had the lack of effects processing, so I got something that had better effects, like Yamaha, and I played with that for a while, and once again, the effects were not what I expected them to be. They weren't taking the sound as far as I wanted it to go. And then I got Korg and the effects processor in that machine. Well, it's literally two boxes in one. To get the sounds that you get out of Korg, you would have to get additional boxes. You have to get an FX unit with Yamaha or Roland to get any kind of similar sound, or a special upgrade card for Yamaha. I mean, they do exist, but they're outrageously expensive. I mean, the cards, those expansion boards will cost more than the synthesizers themselves, because these boxes, they're abundant. There's always tons of them on eBay. Expansion cards, they're about, I think they're about 6 different lines of products, different generations of effects processors, vocoders, guitar preamps, and even a voice synthesizer where you can play keyboard and the synthesizer will speak to you, which is kind of funny. And I don't know how useful that is, especially in this day and age when it's much easier to do that sort of thing on a computer or on a dedicated machine. All three of these devices have performance limitations, and they'll begin to throttle down sound quality when the complexity of music composition gets too high, and you have to read manuals to figure out which combinations of instruments and effects will cause that. It is unfortunate that these machines do not have any kind of CPU load indicators in order to let the user know when that begins to occur. And the threshold for Korg is just lower than for the other two machines. Yamaha does a clever thing by obscuring load times with animated splash screens. Korg, on the other hand, well, it just begins to lag, and that is that. No way around it. Unless you use a wavetable expansion, which contains its own processing unit and doesn't tax the main circuits of the synthesizer. So, which of the three boxes wins the MIDI arms race then? To be honest, none of them. They all have their special purpose. And if we are to plot an imaginary chart with retro gaming being on far left and music production being on far right, then Roland Sound Canvas 55 would land somewhere on the left side, Yamaha would be somewhere at the center, and Korg would be on the far right. At the same time, if you are to include a wavetable expansion with Korg, then it truly shines and becomes the king of all categories. Well, that is all that I wanted to say. The final decision is up to you. So, see you next time.